Hi, this is Kirk Davis. I'm here today with Brittinay Lenhart. She is a work culture consultant, and I wanted to introduce her to you because of the work she does, helping executives elevate the psychological safety of their employees. So, Brittinay guides her clients through a step-by-step culture analysis to evaluate their workplace environment and identify what isn't working. Brittinay helps executives strategically humanize their internal processes so that employees can flourish and leadership teams can continue to attract and retain the best talent. I'm really excited to hear Brittinay discuss how she assesses her work environments and evaluates participation within them, and how she helps all of us show up with greater empathy and humanity. This will be a really great conversation. And Brittany, you have a tagline that I think is really excellent to start us off with. It's work cultures people run to, not away from. So
Yeah.
tell us about you, Brittany, and the work you do.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Kirk, for having me on. Long story short, a little bit about me. I was in the Air Force for a long time. I actually was blue collar. I was a jet engine mechanic on fighters. So, I have a background in that
Yeah.
space to have some experience and exposure. And then I moved on, became a civilian in the government contracting space, still working in the manufacturing like arena, if you will, with jet engines. And but I always had a big passion for leadership and culture. It's always been a thing. My degrees, all that. I just recently paused my PhD in like organizational development to focus more on my business. So it's something that's always been a passion of mine. And since I have, on the floor experience with, good cultures and bad cultures and, the inevitability of high productivity versus not, I know what works and what doesn't. So that's how I
You
came
bring
here.
you bring a lot to the table. I think that's really, really wonderful for me, and maybe I mean from an educational and academic point of view, but from an experiential point of view. And I can tell that you approach this with real heart, I think, which is really wonderful.
Thank
So
you.
what inspired you in your journey to become a work culture consultant?
Frankly, I made it up. I saw a need in the market in a sense when it came to this business that there's no one out there that I knew at least that did this. And I figured it out and made it a thing. And it
Okay.
works because frankly, my clients' success I'm riding on the coattails of because culture is important and the focus on it and how to go even from good to great, which is most of my clients. I have my you always want clients that are good for you, and thankfully, I go from bring people from good to great. I'm not really in the department of fixing broken cultures because that's a whole nother rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, I was just came across some information about how culture will often eat strategy for breakfast. So even the best strategy can really be disrupted by culture if the culture doesn't support the mission and the vision and what the executives hope to achieve.
Yes, sir. I mean, it's all really correlated. Like that phrase, and it's not a bad phrase. It's just that culture and strategy are same. It should be.
I've always felt that way, that the strategy should really understand and work with the culture. And I think culture changes. If it changes very slowly. Usually, there's some
Mhm.
transformational processes.
Yeah.
So, what's been your experience working with executives on cultural creating maybe a psychologically safe space for employees, but in creating a culture that employees run to versus run away from?
Um, Going straight into it, the startups that I work with, we immediately go into the mission, vision, and values workshop because things can just be on a wall that mean nothing that employees mock, and we all know what we've all been there, we've all seen it.
Yeah.
So it can be something that employees mock, or it can be something that incentivizes people. And not only incentivizes employees, but it gives leadership a tool in which to always use. You always go back to that. We're making big decisions. How does it align with our mission, vision, values? It gives leadership a tool of accountability in a positive way, like, hiring and firing people, or, just like how well are you aligning with our values, things of that nature. So that's just that's your foundation, your culture foundation.
Brittany, if I could share, because I know exactly what you're talking about. Way back in my history, I was working with some larger banks, and they had, mission, vision, values that again were promoted by management,
Mhm.
but we didn't feel like we had buy-in, maybe at the employee level. So I think, what's your experience with having employees get buy-in or engagement, and really, believe that there's a purpose to what they do versus just showing up and getting a paycheck?
And communicating, getting this established before you even have employees is important because for the most part, because even when you're onboarding people, and that's day zero, that's when you're, out there in talent retention space trying to find people, you're weeding out bad talent that already doesn't align with your values, but you're also attracting talent that, like, this mission, this vision, fuels me. I used to work in this aerospace company that the mission and vision were fantastic. It really, all of us people and engineers and scientists, everyone was like, we're putting this thing on the ISS. This is exciting, but the values weren't there. So that's where it all went to heck in a handbasket.
Mhm.
So you can have but needless to say, because those other two, they were still able to keep people because those were strong.
It's an
But
exciting mission, yeah.
right. So, having something that incentivizes people from the beginning, but then the buy-in comes into play. So they've bought in, to a point they've been hired, but the continued buy-in is the fact that leadership has to eat, sleep, and breathe these things. It has to be something that's just it's not just on the wall. We actually live these things. So when employees even go to make their own decisions, like, is this in alignment with the values? They're even, when it comes to like feedback, initial feedbacks, this is what we're holding you to, this standard. And that's a lot of times, a lot of companies and leadership, they don't know how to hold people to a certain standard, that doesn't sound negative. These are positive things, and we need you to align with these things. So it's communicating these things, for the betterment of all.
Well, I like that it's positive, that it sets standards, because people really appreciate, I think, when leadership has standards that they live by, that they enforce. But like you said, it guides behavior and it guides decisions. And when people are outside of that, there has to
Mhm.
be kind of an enforcement to say there's a time out here, because we need to be living in harmony with these values and these standards.
Right.
Right.
And like you said, when we were offline before we started recording, like, setting expectations is huge. And I feel like this really helps in that space.
Yeah. And what's nice is it preempts a lot of problems that can creep up in a culture if you're not doing this proactively. So
Mhm.
yeah, I really like that. Now, you and I were talking about some tools that you use to help evaluate a company culture. Can you
Mhm.
talk about your process and how you work with companies?
Yeah, one of my favorites is, and you see it on LinkedIn, I'm the employee survey beast, because I understand, especially being prior military, when we had these climate surveys, I know what everyone felt. I was in the thick of it feeling the same way. And a lot of the times people don't take them seriously, or they're scared of retaliation. And we've all been in these places. So it's, using your empathy as a leader to be like, I know exactly why they don't, want to do this or whatever. So anyways, I help incentivize and bring employee engagement up through these surveys because I don't do it like most people.
Mm.
And frankly, being a third party is better than having your own internal HR do it because frankly, a lot of people don't, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, they have trust issues with HR. So they're not going to be as transparent with you. You want this sense of amnesty hour where people are just, word vomiting, for lack of better words, their qualms or even good things about the company, but they're not going to do it unless they truly have some, an anonymous way to do that. And I provide that. And I also, there's just a way I go about it, IP that I roll it out for clients. But one of my latest ones, we had 25% increase in participation, which is
Mm.
huge in that space. So I'm proud of that. It's something that after doing the survey and getting that done, I do a SWOT analysis. Then I do an executive debrief. And then at that point, we do an action plan with the strategic communication because the survey means absolutely nothing if you
Yeah.
don't communicate what was said and then communicate your action plan, because that's another reason why people don't like doing them as well, is like, oh, it's just falling on deaf ears. What's the point of this?
Well, don't you find, Brittany, that, and this has been my experience too, and I've seen it everywhere, but usually when we're so focused on getting the job done, which is the reality in manufacturing, is just we got to get this order out, we've got to, get these things done by the end of the week or the end of the month or the end of the day. So there's kind of a hair on fire, and there's like get things done. But often what you hear is people on people who are doing the work, they see opportunities to do it better, but if they voice those and they never get heard, they never gets brought forward, it doesn't get addressed, pretty soon they stop offering, ideas and feedback, right?
That as well as it, this is a prime opportunity that can make or break a culture as well, because if you don't do anything with that feedback, the trust goes out the window.
Yeah.
I trusted that you were going to do something with this and make change. And it's not like we're going to be able to check every single box, but you're going to see that there's an effort, in at least these areas that you guys did mention, and roll that out. But again, it has a lot to do with trust, and follow through has a lot to do with culture as well. That mission, vision, values. Are you following through with those?
Yeah.
Just everything.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I want to talk to you about is how you help leadership teams humanize those internal processes.
Mhm.
Do you find that humanizing is that how you would characterize what you do, as helping leaders humanize their internal processes, or do you look at it differently?
I mean, we could definitely use that, because at the end of the day, people are not robots. And there's different leadership styles, and we have to understand there are managers within leadership positions that should be there, and then there are true leaders, and every employee is different. And it doesn't mean that if you only have one leadership style and just keep hounding every employee like that, it doesn't work. You have to understand from an emotional intelligence standpoint, which are the classes that I provide for teams as well as leadership, how to go about that effectively. Everyone has a way that they learn different, and it's the same thing with leadership.
I really like that. And you brought up emotional intelligence, which I think is a very big topic today, and it's probably talked about more than it ever has in the past. But have you seen the kind of impact that emotional intelligence can have on management and their work cultures?
Yes. I do emotional intelligence, like executive coaching, but I also do like one-on-ones with people as well. I've even worked with a machinist it was in a leadership role, and we do this EQ training, and it helps multiple things. This empathy thing, people are like, oh, it's so touchy-feely. Not really. It's just being empathetic enough to know that you want to communicate an end goal, but the way in which you do it is important. And that has a lot to do with EQ, because if you don't have this sense of self-awareness first as to how your message is being received, just there's that. You just have to understand yourself and then understand others. EQ is huge, and that's how you differentiate between, again, managers and leadership roles versus true leaders. And people in companies that have great leadership have the most productivity, which helps your bottom line, which is somehow lost in the mix.
Yeah, one of the things that you talk about is really helping people take advantage of their own unique gifts. And this kind of goes back to maybe individualizing your approach, or, again, seeing that person as a person, not as a number, and I, for most small to medium-sized companies, I would say there is an element of individualization. But how do you recommend that management or leadership make the most of people's unique gifts or talents?
So closed mouths, as we know, don't get fed. And we might not even know what some of these people's talents are, because depending on the environment that they're in. So if you make sure that you have an emotionally intelligent work culture where there's trust and the communication is good, then you're going to have people be more open about said gifts. And then, lead by walking around is one of the best ways to manage or lead people, so having these conversations with your people to get to know them enough to know what their gifts are, and paying attention to them enough to see certain key attributes about them that you could help, their career trajectory, because you're putting them in positions that are not just good for them, but good for the business.
Well, as I talk to manufacturing leaders, one of the things that they'll talk about is really getting the right people in the right place, which means, they're giving them an opportunity to go to different machines, different stations, or different type of work opportunities, because they know that if they get the right person in the right place, they're more likely to stay, they're more likely to contribute, and probably be high performing, versus average.
Yep.
So walking around, talking, getting to know people, creating that culture of trust. Well, that brings us to the conversation of, somebody may approach you because they actually have a toxic work environment,
Mhm.
And so what's been your experience kind of walking into a situation where maybe there's low trust and they might characterize it as a toxic work environment?
So one of the biggest reasons I created this business was because I walked out 7 months out of a job because the environment was so dreadfully toxic, and that company no longer exists. Color me shocked. But a very toxic work environment. What I can say to that is that the CEO was the demise of his own business. And if you're in this position, like Steve Jobs has said, and we've all heard this, like, you hire people because they're good at what they do, they're smarter than you at these things, let them go and let them flourish, if you will. Air quotes, because I'm paraphrasing, but it's the CEOs creating this culture. Like, you have to, if you're walking into it, long story short, let me go back. If you're walking into a toxic work environment, you are the CEO and you inherited this. I'm willing to work with you because I already have buy-in from the top that you want it changed. It's going to take a while because of what you've inherited, but if I have buy-in from the top, we can do this. But if I'm walking into it and there's no buy-in from the top, that it's culture's that serious, nothing's getting done. Unfortunately, that's a hill I'll die on. But if there's no top buy-in, nothing's getting done, and I'm not even going to waste my time.
I think that's been proven true over and over again, right? That unless it's coming from the top down, there's the buy-in and the reinforcement from the top and the willingness to follow through, like you said. So, when as a CEO, how would they kind of mentally, before they call you, how would they assess their own work environment? Do you have any way that a person could look at what's happening on their shop floor? And in the business, it's the front end, it's the back end, it's the shop floor. But to say, I have because we all want to tell ourselves we have a good work culture, right? But are there some signs of a successful work culture versus maybe a less successful one? Can you think of any ways that a person could objectively assess their culture?
It comes down to communication with most things. How effective is communication happening? So, like that lead by walking around thing, even if you're a CEO of a manufacturing company, you can kind of see how the rhythm of communication is flowing. And if things aren't adding up, there's probably data integrity issues. And, so if you start seeing like these trends of things not adding up, there's communication issues with, and whereas if these companies are doing great, they're scaling, they're growing, like things like that, usually, in term longevity, there's a trend there of good communication. But if you're just, sitting here and you're not really growing, there's ability for improvement somewhere.
I suppose I think, I don't know, in this day and age with I don't know, there's the millennials and generation X, Y, Z, and I think there's a lot of culture within the culture, so to speak. So some cultural differences within the culture, but it seems like to me that when people are running for the door at 5 o'clock, although generally speaking, that's what people do. They want to, they've got a life to live and they want to get going. But it seems like there's times when you need people to give a little bit more, maybe work some overtime or give a little bit more to a project. Do you find that the work culture itself is a sign by people's behavior? You can gauge your culture by those type of opportunities.
Absolutely. When people are incentivized, again, they are really in tune with the mission and vision that y'all have. People are much more giving with their time, as long as obviously they're being reciprocated with money, because we can't
Yeah.
just expect people, especially if they're not on salary, to just give. And we also have to know as leaders that we have to reciprocate that same energy. If we see that we've been hounding y'all and you guys are doing a great job, we have to show appreciation and recognition in a way that's palatable to people and not a slap in their face.
Yeah, I've seen some very interesting attempts at recognition and even celebration of accomplishments that really fell short, and it was because it was good in the CEO's mind, but again, it was received as very token, by the
Right.
employees.
And I tell CEOs, like, you understandably, you are detached, especially the bigger you scale. And you have to be cognizant of the fact that you are. And it's not bad, like everyone understands that, but you have to go out of your way sometimes to get out of your office and have, some, even if it's like you have to schedule this in, there's something to be said about, Richard Branson, for example, with Virgin Orbit. I have many friends who work there, and that if Richard Branson can take time out of his day to go into the floor of these shops that he has, like, you have no excuse. I can't empathize with you because I know a billionaire who does this, and they always talk about how great the culture is. So there's something to be said about getting in there yourself.
I think that's a great practice and something that maybe as a result of this conversation, if it wasn't there before, is that connection, emotional connection, but communication with your management, but your all of your employees. I'm sure that, like you said, if it's something you have to schedule, and as the organization grows, there could be a little more difficult, but still very, very effective.
There's ways you can do it, and I help CEOs find those ways. C-suite teams, I have like retainers I have with executive, like an entire C-suites. Because if you've ever seen the movie or the show Billionaires, I'm like the equivalent of Wendy Rhodes.
Yeah.
I'm not a psychologist, but I am your emotional intelligence coach that helps you create the culture in which you want. Because if your executive team is not jiving together, how can you expect the rest of everyone in your company to be jiving if you guys don't have it in line?
Well, and I think especially with the growth of, and most of the manufacturing companies I've talked to are growing. They're adding people. Their workplaces are becoming more complicated. So I'm curious about when somebody's looking at their plan for growth and what they see happening in the future here, and they know they're going to have to add people, to an existing structure. What have you found has been most helpful to the CEOs in kind of, maybe it's replacing things that haven't been working as they implement your recommendations, but what are some of the outcomes that you've seen happen?
Well, for example, there's this client that I work with that they're scaling very fast, and I actually came in and did one of my EQ classes that was specifically targeted on how are we going to sustain this healthy culture that we have as we grow. Because you can have one, but are you going to sustain it as you grow? That's huge. And so I come in and do a workshop with your people, because that's a big part in your leadership team, because you're doing it together. So I do that. But in terms of, quantifiable information that I have, engagement, again, like when I do these surveys, I get over 25% more people in. We get like the testimonials I have on my LinkedIn page that anyone can go look at if they want to. I have CEOs saying that because of their work with me, their communication has improved drastically, which it sounds like it's nothing. It's huge.
Huge. Yeah.
When you're communicating, because this helps bring your bottom line up, if we're talking numbers. I had things written down here, but again, when the culture is better, everything's better. Communication aspect, the employee engagement, and
Performance. Yeah.
it's a long-term thing, and there's levels to this. Like, I'm giving y'all the synopsis or whatnot, but there's a lot that goes into this, especially in the leadership development department. You can't just throw people into these management positions and you're throwing them to the wolves if you give them no training. I've seen that.
Well, Brittany, one of the things that I've heard recently, and it made a lot of sense to me, but a company needs to invest in the second and third tiers of management and leadership in their company because you've got to build a leadership group that'll keep, continue to grow and lead. But when you invest in your second and third tiers of management,
Mhm,
these are the people who are close enough to the top to understand the strategy, but
mhm,
they're close enough to everybody else to have a
mhm,
real impact. So it seems like what you were talking about with training management teams,
mhm.
would be a logical place for people to invest if they want to scale and grow their company.
Absolutely, because again, if people leave, it's because of their boss. 99% of, 90% of the time, if it's a negative reason, it's usually that. So I mean, the military does it. I was in the military a long time. Like we had levels of, leadership training. So many times that we've all been in our careers have had that one boss or more bad bosses that we've had.
Yeah.
Um, well, if that person had actual leadership training, not just management training, because a lot of people get it twisted, for lack of better terms.
Yeah.
Because you manage things, you lead people. And if all your focus is on this, and we're not talking about the human dynamics of leadership, you're going to fail.
I think that's been proven out, from all of our experience. And I can think of examples right off the top that
Hmm.
explain that. Well, Brittany, I want to thank you for the conversation today. And I think it's been very, very enlightening. And something you said at the very beginning is you're looking to help companies go from good to great. And I agree that what you're doing with people and companies is exactly what companies need to do to go from good to great.
Thank you. I really think that going from good to great, as we were talking, it's all about gaining and retaining not just talent, but top talent. Because if you can become a monopoly of top talent in stealing competition, your competition's top talent, that means that you have this amazing culture where people want, again, they run to, not away from. So you're also not losing this top talent that you have that is creating the product in which you've created.
What I like about that is the Puget Sound Business Journal puts out a list every year of the 100 best places to work in Washington State.
Mhm.
And so I highly recommend CEOs to talk to you if they would like to be on that list or be as good as the companies who are on that list. And I've heard of really great companies like you've mentioned where people leave because you work hard. They leave and they think there's something better out there and they come right back to the culture because they go, wow, I didn't realize how really good it was here. I
Right.
can imagine that happening.
And I know that there's this perception that, oh, these people have a good culture. It might be all a facade. I am I completely empathize with why a lot of people feel that way. But the proof is in the pudding. If you got a great culture, it's going to speak volumes because of the numbers, because of the people, the culture, the everything. It's going to bring your bottom line up. That's what we want, but we want to bring it up in a way that's not hurting anyone
Yeah.
along on the way. You can do both. You can have psychological safety and bring yourself up without it, because at the end of the day, that's sustainable. What's not,
It's a real win-win. Yeah.
Mhm. And it's not sustainable when your bottom line goes up like crazy, but your people are,
Trying to
hurt.
find the exit. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Brittany, how would somebody contact you if after this conversation they say I could really use this help for my employees to go from good to great? How would they get a hold of you?
So one of the best ways is my LinkedIn page, Brittinay Lenhart. But of course, you can call me 623-810-4574. And we can, at least get a discovery call going to see if what I'm doing is up your alley.
I'll put all of that contact information in the description of the video. Appreciate you being here today, Brittany,
Thank
and I
you.
think that this is exactly the conversations we need to be having.